Welcome back to Chrono Tales, where forgotten places hold the darkest truths. I'm your host, and tonight we venture into sacred ground turned profane. This is the haunting tale of Secrets of the Abandoned Church. They say that holy ground can never truly be corrupted. But sometimes, the sins of the faithful run so deep that even consecrated earth cannot cleanse them. And sometimes, the dead refuse to rest in peace. Dr. Sarah Chen had dedicated her career to documenting abandoned religious sites across New England. The historian from Yale had photographed over 200 forgotten churches, but none had intrigued her quite like St. Bartholomew's in the hills of Vermont. The church had been abandoned in 1978 under mysterious circumstances. One Sunday morning, the entire congregation simply disappeared. 43 people, including the pastor, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their cars in the parking lot and their Bibles open on the pews. Local authorities had investigated for months, but found no evidence of foul play. The official report concluded that the congregation had likely joined a religious cult and left town together. But Sarah had found inconsistencies in the police records that suggested something far more sinister. The church itself was a modest Gothic revival structure built in 1892. Its stone walls were weathered but intact, though several stained glass windows had been broken by vandals over the decades. Sarah approached the main entrance, her camera bag slung over her shoulder and a flashlight in her hand. The interior was exactly as the police had described it 45 years earlier. Wooden pews arranged in neat rows, all facing an altar where a large cross still hung above the pulpit. Dust motes danced in the colored light streaming through the remaining stained glass windows. Sarah began documenting the space methodically, photographing the architecture, the religious artifacts, the way nature was slowly reclaiming the building. But it was when she reached the altar that she noticed something the police reports hadn't mentioned. The floor in front of the altar was stained dark brown in a pattern that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The stains formed a rough circle, as if something had been placed there and left to bleed.
What happened here?
Sarah knelt down and examined the stains more closely. They weren't just on the surface. They had soaked deep into the wooden floorboards, creating permanent marks that decades of dust couldn't hide. Sarah froze. The sound had come from directly above her head. Someone, or something, was moving around in the church's bell tower.
Hello? Is someone up there?
Sarah waited for an answer, but none came. After 5 minutes of silence, she convinced herself the sound was probably just birds that had nested in the tower. Old buildings made all sorts of noises after all. Behind the altar, Sarah found a narrow door that led to a staircase. The wooden steps were worn smooth by decades of use, and they spiraled upward into darkness. This had to be the way to the bell tower. Sarah climbed slowly, her flashlight beam dancing ahead of her. The staircase was steep and narrow, clearly not designed for frequent use. About halfway up, she found another door, this one leading to what appeared to be the pastor's private study. The study was small but well preserved. A desk sat beneath a small window, and bookshelves lined the walls. But what caught Sarah's attention was the large leather journal lying open on the desk, as if someone had been reading it just moments before. The journal belonged to Reverend Thomas Blackwood, the pastor who had vanished with his congregation. The entries Sarah read painted a picture of a man slowly losing his grip on reality.
October 15th, 1978. The dreams continue to plague me. I see them every night now, dark figures moving through the woods behind the church, calling to something buried beneath our foundation. October 20th, 1978. I found the chamber today. Dear God, what did the original builders hide beneath this holy ground? The symbols carved into the walls. They predate Christianity by centuries.
Sarah flipped through more pages, her unease growing with each entry. Reverend Blackwood wrote about finding an ancient ritual chamber beneath the church, about symbols that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them, about whispers in languages that predated human speech. The footsteps in the bell tower had returned, but this time they were accompanied by something else. A low humming sound, like a choir singing without words.
Who's there? I know you can hear me.
Sarah grabbed the journal and headed for the stairs. She had to find out who was in the bell tower and what they wanted. But as she climbed the final stretch of steps, the temperature began to drop. The bell tower was empty when Sarah reached it, but the massive bronze bell was still swinging slightly, as if it had just been struck. Through the open archways, Sarah could see the forest surrounding the church, dark and forbidding in the afternoon light. But what made Sarah's blood run cold was what she saw carved into the wooden beams of the tower. The same symbols that Reverend Blackwood had described in his journal were here too, cut deep into the wood and stained dark with what looked like blood. And in the center of the tower floor was a trap door, slightly ajar, leading down into darkness beneath the church. Sarah knew she should leave. Every instinct told her to grab her camera, get in her car, and drive back to New Haven. But the historian in her couldn't resist the lure of an undiscovered archaeological site. The ladder led down about 20 feet into a natural cave system that had been modified by human hands. Stone walls had been carved with the same symbols Sarah had seen upstairs, and the air smelled of earth and something else, something organic and unpleasant. The chamber opened into a large, circular room with a domed ceiling. Carved into the walls were alcoves, each containing what appeared to be human remains wrapped in decaying cloth. But these weren't ordinary burials. The bodies had been arranged in specific positions, their arms raised as if in worship or supplication. In the center of the chamber was a stone altar, its surface stained dark and covered with the same symbols that appeared throughout the space. But what made Sarah step backward in horror was what lay on the altar. "43 modern Bibles were arranged in a perfect circle on the altar, each one open to the same page, and each one stained with dark brown marks that could only be blood. Sarah realized with growing terror that these were the Bibles from the missing congregation. They hadn't left town to join a cult. They had been brought down here, to this ancient chamber that predated their church by centuries.
Oh God, what happened to them?
They found the truth, child. They learned what lies beneath all faith.
Sarah spun around, her flashlight beam sweeping across the chamber. In each alcove, the wrapped bodies were moving, sitting up, turning their cloth-covered faces toward her.
We tried to leave, but he wouldn't let us go. He needed us. Needed our faith to feed what lies below.
The 43 members of the missing congregation began climbing down from their alcoves, their movements jerky and unnatural after decades of death. Sarah could see through the gaps in their burial shrouds that their bodies had been changed somehow.
Stay back. Whatever happened to you, I can help.
Help, child. We are beyond help. We are beyond salvation. We are the guardians now, the watchers, the feeders of the thing that dwells in the deep places.
The floor of the chamber began to crack, and through the fissures came a light that was not light, a darkness that somehow illuminated, revealing shapes and angles that hurt to look at directly. Sarah ran. She dropped her camera, clutched Reverend Blackwood's journal to her chest, and ran for the ladder as fast as her legs could carry her. Behind her, the congregation gave chase, their voices raised in a hymn that had never been sung in any earthly church. She burst through the trapdoor into the bell tower, then raced down the spiral staircase, through the pastor's study, and into the main sanctuary. But as she ran toward the front door, she realized something that made her heart stop. The front door was gone. Where it had been was now solid stone wall, carved with the same symbols she had seen in the underground chamber.
No, this is impossible.
Sarah turned to the stained glass windows, but they too had changed. Instead of depicting scenes from the Bible, they now showed images of the thing that dwelt beneath the church, a creature of tentacles and eyes, and impossible geometry that existed in the spaces between reality. The congregation emerged from the back of the church, no longer bothering to maintain their human facades. They were something else now, something that had been fed by faith and sustained by sacrifice for over a century.
You cannot leave, Dr. Chen. You have seen the truth, and the truth must be contained. You will join us in our eternal service.
But Sarah had read the journal. She knew that Reverend Blackwood had found one weakness in the creature's power. Consecrated ground could still hold it, but only if the consecration was renewed with willing sacrifice.
I consecrate this ground. I offer my willing faith against your darkness.
The church exploded with divine light. The walls cracked, the ceiling fell, and Sarah was thrown backward as reality reasserted itself. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in the grass outside a ruined church, Reverend Blackwood's journal still clutched in her hands. Sarah looked back at the church and saw that it was now truly abandoned, no longer maintained by unholy guardians, but genuinely empty and decaying. The front door stood open, and sunlight streamed through holes in the roof. Dr. Sarah Chen drove away from St. Bartholomew's that day with a story she could never tell her academic colleagues. The journal contained the evidence, but who would believe such an impossible tale? The last entry in Reverend Blackwood's journal, written in a shaking hand just before the final service, contained a warning that Sarah now understood all too well.
Faith is a powerful force, but it can be corrupted by those who know how to twist it. Beware the churches that never close their doors, the congregations that never age, and the pastors who promise eternal service. For some forms of worship should never be offered, and some gods should never be fed.
And that concludes tonight's journey into the darkness. Remember, not all who gather in his name serve the light. Sometimes the most dangerous monsters are those who wear the masks of the faithful. Thank you for joining me in the shadows. Until next time, be careful what you worship, and be even more careful what worships you back.